Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to ask the question: does Dungeons and Dragons have a spiritual aspect? Question mark. All right, let's go. All right, so I won't bury the lead. I think the answer is yes, but I want to talk about this in depth. So let's start talking about this. So one, this is an incredibly dangerous question, right? And the reason why is no one will argue with you that Dungeons and Dragons has an intellectual aspect, right? So we as human beings, we have three intangible aspects of our being, okay? One of them is highly debated, okay? So we have an intellectual aspect of our humanity. If you're a human, you have intellectuality, right? You also have emotionality. You have emotions, right? And then last, I say you have spirituality. And I'm an evangelical Christian, so I'm saying you have spirituality. But a Muslim would come and say you have spirituality. And even a Satanist would come and say you have a spirituality. And lots of religions would say, lots of proponents and practitioners of different religions would say you have a spirituality. Now, atheists, actually, the only people who say you don't are atheists. Agnostics say, I don't know. Yeah, who cares what they think? Like, if your only answer to a question is, I don't know, thank you, next. Right? But the atheists matter, right? And they say you don't have spirituality. When you die, you go to the dirt, right? And you do not have an extended, there is no afterlife, right? So what's interesting is this is an incredibly dangerous question, in my opinion, and I know I'm going to get pushback from this. And the reason why is people don't like the idea that, so many people question if humans even have spirituality at all. And so, of course, a lot of people, if there's even a question of it, if spirituality exists, then it gets even stranger when you're saying, hey, does D&D have a spiritual aspect, right? So one of the things I want to do right now is I want to say thank you to Professor Dungeon Master, and he has given me the courage to even breach this subject, right? So first of all, I'm not saying Dungeons and Dragons has a spiritual aspect. I don't have to say it first because Professor Dungeon Master said it first, which is really fascinating, right? So he said that he believes Dungeons and Dragons has a spiritual aspect to it, right? And the moment and this is incredibly important from the perspective of permissioning. And I get a lot of people come in the comments and they're like, oh, Scott, you need permission to do this and this and this. And I think it's really interesting because they say it in a mocking tone. And yes, I think permissioning is incredibly important in this world, right? They're like, I do whatever I want in my game, right? And but I'm like, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but people aren't going to sign up if it's not permissioned, right? And I do think this is really interesting in that we just went through the OGL, the 2023 Manic Panic. Dungeons and Dragons tried to change the OGL, and and a large portion of the D&D community said we'd like to end Dungeons and Dragons forever. That's literally what happened, right? Like, so it's shocking, So you have this situation, and so everybody started looking at really close, in depth, and for months before the OGL situation happened, there were specific D&D YouTubers who were saying, commentators, YouTube commentators, YouTube D&D commentators, who were specifically saying the OGL cannot be revoked, right? And what's fascinating is once we got into it, a lot of lawyers came out and said, technically you can't revoke it, but it doesn't matter if technically, functionally they can absolutely revoke it. They can kill it, they can throttle it, they can make it so it can fully exist, but they can make it so that no one uses it. Right? And so it's the same thing with permissioning. You could say that you don't need permission for things, but permissioning is really important. And so I took Professor Dungeon Master has 100,000 subs. Like his channel is literally 50 times larger than mine, right? He's got a play button, right? So for him, very level-headed guy, to come and start discussing openly that Dungeons and Dragons has a spiritual aspect really made me feel like, okay, it's safe to breach this subject, okay? So let's get into it. So why do I think that Dungeons & Dragons has a spiritual aspect? So one, let's just count off the obvious, right? It's like, it's got alignment, right? It literally codifies morality right in the game, right? Like, and it's been there from the beginning. And of course, atheist designers came to pull it out, and they were like, we can't pull this out. This is a load-bearing wall. Dungeons and Dragons doesn't function without alignment, and they put it right back in. All right, so that to me is strong evidence that Dungeons and Dragons is massively concerned with and linked with human spirituality, right? So you have morality, right? Alignment is discussed directly in it. Next, the pantheons, right? It's really not even debatable whether Dungeons and Dragons has a spiritual aspect, because it has multiple pantheons, and these pantheons are not like, oh, let's look at some made up deities. They're like quite literally earth deities, right? Like, go take a look at deities and demigods. You're gonna find a ton of gods from multiple cultures, right? Not like made up gods, for realsies gods, right? Like that people actually, for realsies actually gods that people for realsies worship. Doesn't mean they're real gods, right? Like, yeah. So for gods that people for realsies worship, right? Like, so from that perspective, yes, you're very much dealing with an aspect of spirituality. Next, the stories that Dungeons and Dragons creates, right? So the greatest D&D story of 2023 is Legends of Vox Machina season 2, right? In there, Grog, actually, this is spoilers for Legends of Vox Machina. So Grog is actually in, I think it's in season 2, episode 9, we find out that Grog is a murdering marauder and literally murdered no small number of innocent people in his youth. Like, just straight murdered them. Not killed, not slain, murdered. Not released, murdered, right? We find out that Grog is a multiple X murderer, right? We don't know how many, but we definitely know he murdered people, right? They show it. Like, they show that his Goliath clan did a whole lot of Viking-style raiding, and when they would come down, they would just rain hellfire. Like, it was just like they'd come down and murder people left and right, and then just loot and take everything they wanted, right? And now we're looking at Grog, and we're seeing this road to redemption, right? That is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. You're seeing a road to redemption. What is redemption? That's a spiritual arc, right? If you don't believe in a God, there's no reason for you to I have no idea why anybody who doesn't believe in a God does one single good thing, right? Y'all's got 75 years and you're done, right? So why should you waste a single moment doing good here, right? Yeah, y'all should get yours while you can, because as soon as this life is finished, this 75 years, y'all's got an eternity in the hot place, right? So you might want to have your fun while you can. Right, like, because the reality, and that's the issue is, but we get into Legends of Vox Machina, right, and we see this issue where this is a redemption arc. Redemption is not emotional. Redemption is not intellectual. Redemption is spiritual, right? You need to be redeemed, right? And Grog is realizing he needs redemption, right? And he's walking through this with Pike, right? That is a story of spirituality, and it is there in the metal of Legends of Vox Machina, because Legends of Vox Machina is built brick by brick by Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, absolutely, exactly like Professor Dungeon Master said, has a spiritual aspect. Every word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic, please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.